The morning sun cast long shadows across Mary's garden as she knelt in the soft earth, carefully planting new tomato seedlings. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the sweet scent of blooming flowers from her rose bushes. Her small house sat on top of a gentle hill, surrounded by open fields and distant forests, the perfect picture of peaceful country living. Mary wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of dirt that she didn't notice. The garden was her pride and joy, something to keep her busy during the long months when Jack was away on his military consulting missions. She understood why he had to go. After 20 years in an elite military unit, his experience was valuable. Still, she missed him terribly during these extended absences. As she worked, her eyes drifted to the sky, watching the strange lights that had been appearing more frequently lately. The government insisted they were just weather balloons or atmospheric phenomena, but Mary had her doubts. She'd been married to a military man long enough to know when something wasn't quite right. The security system beeped softly as she entered the house to wash up for lunch. Jack had insisted on installing it before his last deployment, much more complex than what their neighbors had. Just standard stuff, he'd said, but Mary had caught glimpses of unusual screens and readings that definitely weren't part of any home security system she'd ever seen advertised. While preparing her sandwich, Mary's mind wandered to the strange things she'd been noticing around the property. Just yesterday, she'd found a section of their reinforced fence bent in an odd way, as if something incredibly strong had tested it. The week before that, there had been footprints in her garden, too large to be human, and shaped all wrong for any local wildlife. Her tablet flickered again, the third time this week. All the electronics had been acting strangely, getting worse as the days passed. The repair company said everything was fine, but Mary knew better. She learned to trust her instincts during her years with Jack. Looking out the kitchen window, Mary remembered the day Jack had taught her self-defense. Just the basics, he'd said, but the moves he'd shown her seemed far more advanced than basic. She'd seen the look in his eyes then, the same one he got whenever the strange lights appeared in the sky. He was worried about something he couldn't tell her. The afternoon light began to fade as Mary finished her gardening. She'd found another odd mark near the greenhouse, a perfect circle burned into the grass. Nearby, her prized roses had withered overnight, as if exposed to some invisible force. She took pictures with her phone, adding them to the folder she'd been keeping. Jack had taught her to document anything unusual, another habit that seemed excessive for a retired military officer's wife. That evening, as she prepared for bed, Mary went through her security routine. Jack had been very specific about it. Check all windows, even though they automatically locked. Verify the garden sensors, although she wasn't quite sure what they were sensing. Finally, activate the night protocols, which caused a soft, barely audible hum throughout the house. As she lay in bed, Mary thought about the message she'd received from Jack earlier that week. "Everything okay there?" he'd asked, as always. But this time, he'd added something new. "Remember that emergency beacon I gave you? Keep it close." She reached over to her nightstand, touching the small device that looked like an ordinary pendant. Jack had given it to her years ago, making her promise to wear it always. The strange lights appeared again, closer this time, hovering over the distant forest. Mary watched them through her bedroom window, remembering all the times Jack had talked about his consulting work with that tight smile she knew meant he was hiding something. Whatever he was really doing, she trusted him. But sometimes, on nights like this, she wished he'd tell her the whole truth. The lights moved in ways that no weather balloon could, making patterns too precise to be natural. Mary clutched her pendant tighter, wondering if perhaps Jack's precautions weren't paranoid after all. As she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her house, testing its defenses, waiting for the right moment to make its move. High above Earth's atmosphere, hidden from primitive human detection systems, R7 reviewed its surveillance data with growing confidence. The creature had spent 3 full cycles studying these simple beings, focusing particularly on the isolated dwelling that sat atop a gentle hill. Its target, The female human followed the same pattern every day, a perfect subject for the required tests. R7's outer membrane shifted colors slightly, reflecting its satisfaction. The High Council would be pleased with this selection. The dwelling was far from other human structures, and the only other occupant, a male, had been absent for many rotations. These humans, with their primitive technology and predictable patterns, would never detect its presence. The alien observer adjusted its optical sensors, zooming in on Mary as she worked in her garden. Such simple creatures, these humans, still touching dirt with their bare hands, growing food in the ground like animals. R7's species had evolved beyond such primitive practices thousands of cycles ago. They now grew all sustenance in perfectly controlled orbital facilities. Through its advanced surveillance equipment, R7 watched Mary enter her dwelling. The alien had already mapped what it assumed was the complete security system, simple motion sensors, and basic electronic locks. It noted with amusement how the human female checked these daily, as if such basic precautions could stop any real threat. The dwelling's electronic emissions suggested no advanced technology, just the usual human communication devices and appliances. R7 moved its observation vessel closer, using the cloud cover for concealment. Its mission was to collect data on human responses to various stimuli, and this isolated female would make an ideal test subject. The High Council needed this information to determine humanity's place in the galactic order. So far, everything indicated they were barely above primitive status. The alien sensors detected the regular evening energy pulse from the house, what it assumed was their simple security system activating. R7 had recorded this same pattern for weeks now. Its data showed nothing unusual about the energy signature, though something about it tickled the edge of its awareness. The alien dismissed the feeling. No primitive species could hide anything from its advanced scanning technology. As darkness fell, R7 began its final preparation for the test. Its species had done this countless times on other worlds, always following the same careful protocol. First, conduct detailed scans. Then, test the subject's resistance to fear stimuli. Finally, if the subject proved interesting, collect them for further study. The High Council valued thoroughness above all. Through its sensors, R7 watched Mary prepare for sleep. It had observed the small pendant she always wore, dismissing it as primitive jewelry. The alien scans showed it to be simple metal, nothing more. Like everything else in the dwelling, it appeared to be exactly what it seemed, primitive human craftsmanship. R7's outer membrane rippled with what its species considered laughter. These humans and their obvious security measures were almost entertaining. They really thought they could protect themselves with such basic technology. The alien had already disabled what it believed were all the dwelling's communication systems, though it noted with amusement that the house's power systems seemed to run on an independent circuit. As the night grew deeper, R7 reviewed its mission parameters one final time. The High Council's instructions were clear: gather data on human responses to various stimuli, focusing on their fear reactions and problem-solving capabilities. The alien felt certain this isolated female would provide excellent data points for the study. What R7 couldn't know, was that its own sophisticated scanning systems were being carefully monitored and recorded. The quantum-encrypted security network around the house, far beyond anything the alien could detect, had been tracking its movements for weeks. Every scan it made, every test of the property's defenses, had been logged and analyzed. The alien observer prepared to begin its test sequence, still completely unaware that it had already failed the most important test of all: the ability to recognize that appearances can be deceiving. As R7 moved closer to the house, its sensors remained blind to the true nature of the security systems it had dismissed as primitive, never realizing that its own observations had been observed all along. The bedroom window shattered inward with a sound like breaking ice. Mary rolled out of bed instantly, her body moving on pure instinct before her mind could catch up. Jack's training took over. She dropped low, staying out of sight, just as a strange figure slid through the broken window. In the dim light, she could see it wasn't human. The creature's skin rippled like liquid metal, its form shifting and changing as it moved. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, with limbs that bent in impossible ways. Mary's heart pounded, but years of Jack's preparation kept her mind clear and focused. R7 was surprised by the human female's quick reaction. Its research had indicated humans were slow and clumsy when woken from sleep. The alien moved forward, confident in its superior strength and technology. The room's darkness posed no problem for its advanced vision systems, but something was interfering with its other sensors. Mary reached under the bed, grabbing the metal bar Jack had insisted she keep there. Just in case, he'd said, with that look in his eyes that meant he knew more than he could say. Now, as she gripped the seemingly simple weapon, she felt it vibrate slightly in her hands, coming alive with hidden technology. The alien reached for her with limbs that stretched like mercury, but Mary was already moving. The defensive moves Jack had taught her flowed naturally. Step, pivot, strike. The metal bar connected with the alien's form, and a burst of energy rippled through its liquid skin. R7 recoiled in shock. The human weapon should have been harmless, yet its outer membrane was now burning with an impossible energy. Mary used the alien's surprise to her advantage, just as Jack had taught her. Always use their assumptions against them. His voice echoed in her memory. She rolled across the room, putting the bed between them, her hand finding the pendant around her neck. One press would activate the emergency beacon, but she waited. First, she needed to know what she was dealing with. R7's confidence turned to confusion. The human female moved with trained precision, not the clumsy fear it had expected. The alien's sensors still showed nothing but primitive technology, yet the weapon she held had somehow pierced its advanced defensive field. Something was very wrong with this scenario. The house's systems began activating one by one, but not the simple security measures R7 had detected earlier. Hidden panels in the walls slid open, revealing equipment that the alien sensors somehow hadn't detected. The bedroom lights flickered with patterns that made R7's optical sensors blur and distort. Mary watched as the alien's smooth movements became jerky and uncertain. The creature had expected an easy target, not a prepared defender. She remembered Jack's words. If anything ever happens, make them regret their assumptions. She pressed a hidden switch on the metal bar, and it hummed with increasing power. R7 tried to launch its neural disruptor, but the strange energy patterns in the room were interfering with its systems. The alien's confidence was gone now, replaced by growing alarm. The High Council's data had indicated nothing like this. These humans were supposed to be primitive, their technology simple and crude. The alien lunged forward in desperation, its liquid form stretching across the room. Mary ducked and rolled, her movements precise and practiced. The metal bar struck again, sending more energy cascading through the alien's form. R7's outer membrane rippled with pain and confusion. Finally, Mary pressed her pendant. The emergency beacon activated with a soft pulse that she felt more than heard. The alien's form wavered, its liquid skin seeming to freeze in places. Whatever Jack had built into their house's defenses, it was working. R7 realized too late that it had made a terrible mistake. The house was not what it seemed. The human female was not what she seemed. The alien tried to retreat, but the room's hidden systems were fully active now, trapping it in a web of energy it couldn't understand. Mary stood calmly, the metal bar held ready as she watched the alien struggle against the house's defenses. She knew Jack would be coming. All she had to do was hold out until he arrived. The alien had chosen the wrong house, the wrong woman, and was about to learn just how wrong it had been about humanity's capabilities. The emergency beacon's signal reached the orbital station within seconds. Jack was already moving before the first alert finished flashing across his command screen. His worst fears had finally come true. They had found Mary. The massive viewing window of his command center showed Earth floating peacefully below, but Jack wasn't admiring the view. His fingers flew across the control panels as he activated his personal combat pod. Around him, his crew worked with practiced efficiency, but none dared to speak. They had never seen their commander like this. "Sir," his second-in-command started to say, but Jack cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Initiate Protocol 7. I'm going down." His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with an intensity that made even veteran officers step back. They had all heard rumors about their commander's past, about why Earth's most advanced defensive fleet was led by a man who chose to live in a simple country house. The combat pod hummed to life as Jack strapped himself in. It looked simple and rough on the outside, like all human military equipment, hiding its true nature. As the pod systems activated, layers of advanced technology awakened. The simple metal shell transformed, revealing weapons and defensive systems that most alien species thought were centuries beyond human capability. As his pod launched from the station, Jack's mind raced through everything that had led to this moment. The years of preparing, of building defenses into their home while making them look primitive, teaching Mary just enough to defend herself without revealing too much, always watching, waiting for the day some overconfident alien species would make this mistake. The pod sensors showed him everything happening at the house. He could see the alien intruder trapped in Mary's defensive grid, its liquid form struggling against energies it couldn't understand. Pride swelled in his chest. Mary had handled everything perfectly, using all the skills he taught her without even knowing their true purpose. Earth's atmosphere burned around the pod as it descended, but Jack barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the tactical displays, watching Mary hold her ground against the alien. The creature's biosigns showed confusion and growing fear. Good. It was about to learn why humans had earned their reputation across the galaxy. Few knew the truth about humanity's place in the galactic community. Earth appeared primitive by choice, hiding its true capabilities behind a carefully maintained facade. Jack's consulting work was actually commanding humanity's most advanced fleet, protecting Earth while maintaining the illusion of a developing civilization. The pod's stealth systems kept it invisible as it streaked through the night sky. Jack's hands tightened on the controls as he saw the alien make another attempt to subdue Mary. His wife dodged the attack with practiced ease, using the defensive tools he'd given her years ago. The simple metal bar she wielded contained technology that could disable most alien combat systems. As he approached the house, Jack activated his combat suit. The seemingly ordinary uniform transformed, becoming a suit of armor that could match any alien technology. He had hoped this day would never come, that he could keep his two worlds separate. But now that they had converged, he would show this alien exactly why human warriors were feared across multiple galaxies. The pod sensors identified the intruder as a member of a species known for their arrogance and tendency to underestimate primitive races. Jack's expression hardened. They had chosen the wrong planet, the wrong house, and definitely the wrong family to test their theories on. His pod settled silently in the garden Mary loved so much. Through the house's security systems, Jack could see his wife standing firm, holding the alien at bay. She had no idea that her simple garden had more defensive systems than most alien military bases, or that her quiet life had been protected by technology beyond most species' comprehension. As Jack prepared to exit the pod, he took a deep breath. The time for hiding was over. The alien had brought this on itself, and now it would learn why humanity's warriors were both respected and feared throughout the galaxy. It was time to show this overconfident creature exactly what it meant to threaten a human warrior's family. R7's liquid form pressed Mary against the wall, its confidence returning as it finally managed to restrain her. The alien's outer membrane rippled with satisfaction, though something about the human female's calm expression made it uneasy. She wasn't showing the fear that every other test subject had displayed. "You really should have done better research," Mary said quietly, her voice steady despite the alien's grip. She wasn't struggling anymore, but her hand remained firmly wrapped around her pendant. "Did you even check whose house this was?" The alien's form shifted, creating what passed for a face in its species. It had expected screaming, crying, or at least begging. Instead, this primitive human was speaking to it, as if it had made a mistake. R7's sensors were still being disrupted by the house's strange energy fields, but it refused to show uncertainty. Mary smiled, and it wasn't a smile of fear. I figured out what Jack really did years ago. Not the details, but enough. She looked directly at what she assumed were the alien's eyes. Did you think he chose this isolated location because we like gardening? Something in her tone made R7 pause. The alien's data banks quickly searched through known human military personnel, cross-referencing the name Jack with this location. Suddenly, its outer membrane went completely still, all rippling motion freezing as information began flooding its consciousness. The house's hidden systems activated fully now, panels sliding open in every wall to reveal technology that R7's species had thought impossible for humans to possess. The simple security system the alien had detected was only a facade, hiding quantum-locked defensive grids and energy webs that could trap even the most advanced species. "You're in his house," Mary continued, watching the alien's form shift from confident silver to a pale, almost white color. "You attacked his wife. And if I know Jack, he's already on his way." She almost felt sorry for the creature as its outer membrane began to tremble. Almost. R7's databanks were now screaming warnings. This wasn't just any human dwelling. This was the home of the legendary Commander Jack, the human warrior who had led the defense of the Orion Arm during the last galactic conflict. The same human who had single-handedly defeated 3 Dragoon warships, whose combat tactics were now taught in military academies across 17 star systems. The alien tried to pull away from Mary, but the house's defensive systems had it fully trapped now. Its liquid form solidified in patches as energy fields it couldn't understand held it in place. The simple human dwelling had transformed into a containment system more advanced than anything in R7's experience. "He always said the best defense is the one your enemy doesn't know exists," Mary said, stepping away from the now restrained alien. She moved with the confidence of someone who had known more than she let on for years. "All those times he taught me basic self-defense. Those were elite combat techniques. The simple security system, advanced alien containment technology." R7's form rippled with panic as its sensors finally detected the quantum signature of an approaching combat pod. The alien had heard stories about human warriors' combat pods, about their impossible combination of technologies that no single species should have been able to achieve. And this one belonged to Commander Jack himself. Mary walked calmly to the window, looking out at the night sky. "You know what the funny thing is? We really do love this simple life. The garden, the quiet evenings, the peaceful countryside. That's all real." She turned back to the alien. "But just because we choose to live simply doesn't mean we can't defend ourselves." The alien's translation systems caught up with a backlog of intercepted communications, and if it had been capable of going pale, it would have. It had violated not just any human home, but a residence protected by 17 different interstellar treaties. The High Council hadn't authorized this. No one had authorized this. Through the house's now transparent walls, R7 could see the combat pod landing in the garden. Its sensors registered power readings that should have been impossible for human technology to achieve. As the pod's door began to open, the alien realized it had made the worst mistake of its existence. It hadn't just attacked a human female. It had attacked the wife of humanity's most legendary warrior. The combat pod's door opened with a soft hiss, releasing a cloud of cold air into the garden. Jack stepped out, his uniform shifting and changing as he moved, transforming into a suit of armor that seemed to absorb the darkness around it. He walked slowly, deliberately, each step leaving small glowing marks in the grass that Mary recognized as containment field generators. R7 tried to shift its form, to find any weakness in the house's holding field, but nothing worked. The alien watched in growing terror as Jack entered through the broken window, his movements smooth and controlled. This wasn't the clumsy, primitive human it had expected to find. This was a warrior whose reputation spanned galaxies. "You know," Jack said, his voice calm and conversational. "I always knew someone would try this eventually. That's why I built all this." He gestured around the room at the now visible defensive systems. "But I really hoped they would be smarter than to attack my wife." Mary moved to stand beside him, the metal bar still humming with energy in her hand. "I had it under control," she said with a small smile. "But I'm glad you came home early." The way she stood, perfectly balanced and ready for action, showed that she had absorbed far more of Jack's training than the alien had initially assumed. "The High Council will hear of this violation." R7 tried to sound threatening, its translation system making its voice echo strangely in the room. "Your defensive systems are far beyond what is permitted for a species of your development level." Jack laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You really don't understand, do you?" He walked closer to the trapped alien. "We choose to live simply. We choose to keep most of our technology hidden. But that choice was never about capability." His armor shifted, revealing weapons that made R7's outer membrane quiver in recognition. "Those treaties you're thinking about," Jack continued, "the ones that classify Earth as a developing world, they're not restrictions on us. They're protections for everyone else." He touched a control on his arm, and the house's containment field tightened, causing R7's liquid form to compress painfully. Mary watched as her husband moved around the alien, recognizing the tactical assessment patterns he taught her years ago. She had always known he was more than a simple military consultant, but seeing him now, she understood why other species feared human warriors. "Your kind always make the same mistake," Jack said, his voice hardening. "You see our farms, our simple homes, our gardens, and you think we're primitive. You never stop to ask why a species capable of quantum shielding and gravity manipulation would choose to live this way." R7's form rippled with desperate attempts to communicate with its ship, but every frequency was blocked. The alien began to understand that the simple country house had better containment technology than most high-security military bases in known space. "We live simply because we choose to," Jack explained, his armor adapting and shifting as he spoke. "We farm because we enjoy it. We build wooden houses because we like them. We keep our technology hidden because we've learned that the galaxy isn't ready to handle everything humanity can do." The alien sensors detected energy signatures that shouldn't have been possible, weapons tech that couldn't exist, defensive systems that defied known physics, all hidden within what had appeared to be a simple human dwelling. "Your High Council didn't authorize this mission, did they?" Jack asked, though his tone made it clear he already knew the answer. "You acted alone, thinking you found an easy target." He shook his head slowly. "Do you know how many treaties you've violated? How many laws you've broken?" R7's outer membrane had shifted to a pale, sickly color as the full magnitude of its mistake became clear. It had assumed that humanity's simple lifestyle meant they were primitive. Instead, it had stumbled into the home of one of the most advanced military commanders in known space, bringing down the weight of not just human retribution, but galactic law as well. Jack reached out and touched the containment field, causing patterns of energy to ripple across its surface. "Now," he said quietly, "let's discuss exactly how you're going to explain this to your council." The alien shuddered, realizing that facing its own leaders might actually be preferable to dealing with the human warrior whose home it had invaded. 3 days after the incident, Mary worked in her garden again, replanting the rows that had been damaged during the confrontation. The morning sun felt warm on her back as she carefully placed new tomato seedlings in the soil. Behind her, the house showed no signs of the advanced technology it had revealed that night. All panels and systems were hidden once more behind its simple wooden walls. Jack sat on the porch steps, watching her work while holding a cup of coffee. He had spent the last few days dealing with the diplomatic fallout of R7's unauthorized mission. The aliens' High Council had been horrified to learn one of their observers had violated multiple galactic treaties by attacking a protected residence, particularly the home of a renowned human military commander. The Council sent another apology this morning. Jack called out to Mary, his voice carrying easily across the garden. "They're offering to replace everything in the garden with specially engineered plants from their agricultural worlds." Mary looked up from her seedlings, brushing dirt from her hands. "Tell them no, thank you. I prefer to grow things the old way." She smiled, remembering how the alien had thought their simple lifestyle meant they were primitive. "Though I wouldn't mind if they could do something about the potato beetles." Jack laughed, a warm sound that carried none of the cold authority he had shown during the confrontation. "I'll pass that along." He set his coffee down and walked over to help her with the planting. His hands, which 3 days ago had controlled weapons that could have destroyed a small fleet, now gently pressed soil around delicate plant stems. "You know," Mary said as they worked together, "you could have told me the truth years ago. I had figured out most of it anyway." She paused, looking at her husband. "All those consulting missions were really you commanding Earth's defense fleet, weren't they?" Jack nodded, carefully placing a support stake next to a young plant. "I wanted to keep you safe by keeping you separate from that world. Turns out I should have trusted you more." He smiled at her. "You handled that alien better than most trained officers would have." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, rebuilding their garden together. The quantum containment generators Jack had dropped were now completely hidden beneath the grass, their presence marked only by flowers that bloomed a bit brighter than their neighbors. The council also sent files about their species, Jack mentioned as they finished the last row. Apparently, they're considered one of the most technologically advanced races in the galaxy. They really thought they were studying a primitive world. Mary laughed softly. "I suppose that's why we keep up this appearance of being simple farmers. To let them all think we're still developing." She gestured at their house, their garden, the peaceful countryside around them. "Partly," Jack admitted, "but mostly because this is how we want to live. Having advanced technology doesn't mean we have to use it for everything." He looked around at their home with clear affection. "Though I am thinking about upgrading your gardening tools a bit, maybe add some features to help with those potato beetles." Later that evening, they sat on their porch watching the sunset. The house's hidden systems hummed quietly, now familiar to Mary, who had spent the last few days learning about their true capabilities. Jack had finally explained everything. About humanity's place in the galaxy, about why they chose to appear less advanced than they were. "Will they send someone else?" Mary asked, sipping her tea. "Another observer who thinks we're primitive." Jack shook his head. "Not to our house. After this incident, the council added our property to the restricted registry. No alien species can legally come within 100 miles without explicit permission." He smiled. "Though I'm keeping all the defenses active, just in case." Mary leaned against him, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere up there, R7 was probably still explaining to its superiors why it had chosen to attack the wife of a human warrior. Down here, life would continue as it always had, simple, peaceful, and exactly how they chose to live it. "You know what's funny?" she said after a while. "Even knowing everything now, I wouldn't change how we live, though I would like to know more about how that metal bar you gave me works." She felt Jack chuckle beside her. "And maybe a few other defensive tricks, just in case someone else makes the same mistake." The night settled around them, quiet and peaceful. Their house might contain technology beyond most alien species' comprehension, but it was still just home. And tomorrow, Mary would go back to tending her garden. Jack would return to protecting Earth, and they would continue living exactly as they chose, simple but far from primitive.